I'd been at this company for 15 years. 15. That's a long time, isn't it? You start to feel like the office walls are part of you, like the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint smell of printer ink are somehow etched into your memory. Some mornings, I'd walk in and catch that whiff of coffee mixed with paper, the subtle musk of recycled carpet, and I'd feel, at home, that I remember one of those mornings clearly. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the city was already buzzing. I pushed the glass door open, the cold metal handle familiar under my hand, and stepped into the quiet office. My footsteps echoed against the tile floor, bouncing off walls lined with framed certificates and photos of long-forgotten team events. The hum of computers warming up, the rhythmic clatter of keyboards, the faint hiss of the coffee machine, those sounds were comforting in a way only familiarity can be. I'd grab my coffee cup from the counter, the ceramic warm against my fingers. I liked to linger for a moment, just watching the empty hallways, feeling the quiet before the chaos of emails, meetings, and deadlines took over. I'd take a sip, the bitter warmth grounding me, and glance around my little corner of the office. My desk was cluttered, sure. Family photos, a few plants I'd managed to keep alive, a stack of reports I'd probably never touch. But it was mine. 15 years. That's what kept running through my mind. 15 years of mornings like this, of staying late to help a coworker, of leading projects, of the quiet pride when a plan I'd nurtured came together perfectly. I had stability. I had routine. And yet, there was this tiny, almost imperceptible unease that sometimes crept in. A subtle tension I couldn't quite put my finger on. Nothing obvious, just a fleeting thought. Something feels off today. But I'd shake it off. Routine has a way of smoothing out doubts, at least for a little while. I remembered my first day at the company, 15 years ago. The memory was crystal clear, like a photo tucked into the back of my mind. I walked through the same doors, younger, eager, clutching a brand new notebook that I was sure would hold all the secrets to my success. My mentor met me in the hallway, a kind-faced woman with a sharp mind and a softer smile. She shook my hand and said, "You'll figure it out, but don't forget, it's not about how fast you go. It's about what you leave behind." I laughed, then, nervous and a little cocky, thinking she was just being philosophical. But now, 15 years later, I understood. I had left behind, well, a lot. Projects, ideas, moments of pride. A little bit of myself in every corner of this office. Walking past the cubicles that morning, I nodded to familiar faces. Some looked just as tired as I felt, coffee cups in hand, headphones around their necks, staring at screens with that glazed intensity only years of routine can produce. The office smelled like paper, coffee, and something faintly metallic from the printers. I inhaled it like a ritual, something grounding, a sensory tether to a world I had navigated for so long that I sat at my desk and ran my fingers over the keyboard, feeling the keys click in a rhythm that had become second nature. I glanced at the photos taped to my monitor. My dog, my sister's wedding, the vacation I'd barely been able to take because work deadlines always loomed. It all felt safe, familiar, predictable, the kind of predictability you cling to when life outside the office feels messy. And yet, there it was again, that tiny flicker of unease. I couldn't ignore it forever. Maybe it was just one of those mornings where the city seemed louder than usual, or the office felt emptier, or maybe it was something I hadn't noticed before. Something subtle in the way people glanced at me, or avoided my gaze. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was nothing. I repeated that to myself like a mantra, because admitting the thought, even for a second, made my stomach twist. And I sipped my coffee, letting the bitter warmth soothe me, and for a few moments, I just watched the office wake up. The printers buzzed. The phones rang. The hum of conversation picked up. The day would begin, as it always did. I had 15 years of experience telling me I could handle it, that I had seen worse, that the routine was a kind of shield. But still, there was that whisper at the back of my mind. That small, almost imperceptible voice saying, "Pay attention. Things aren't quite right." That I didn't know it yet. But that tiny flicker of unease was the first thread in a pattern I'd come to recognize too late. The calm before the storm, the quiet before everything I thought I could count on slipped through my fingers. That I took another sip of coffee, smiled faintly at the photo of my dog, and told myself it was just another day. But deep down, a little seed of doubt had been planted. A seed that would grow faster than I ever imagined. At first, it was subtle, almost laughably so. The kind of things you convince yourself are nothing, that you're just imagining them. But deep down, there's a little voice that whispers, pay attention. I noticed it in the small things. Emails from my boss that used to start with a friendly, casual line now felt clipped, almost curt. Meetings I'd always been included in suddenly changed format. I'd be sitting in the room, and somehow, the topics I'd spent years leading were glossed over. Not ignored entirely, just skimmed. It was like I was becoming a ghost in my own office. That I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Everyone gets busy, right? Maybe deadlines were piling up, maybe people were stressed. But then there were the glances. Quick, sideways looks from colleagues that I couldn't decipher. One moment they were talking about a new project with excitement. The next they'd look away as if I wasn't supposed to be there at all. And yet, no one said anything. Not a word. I remember one afternoon in particular. I was at my desk, finishing up a report I'd been working on for weeks. The sun streamed in through the blinds, casting stripes of gold across the papers. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I didn't care. I just wanted to finish. I looked up and caught my boss standing across the room, arms folded, expression unreadable. I smiled, a small, polite nod. Nothing. No acknowledgement. Just that quiet tension in the air, and then it hit me. That faint, creeping feeling that had been there for weeks now settled like a stone in my stomach. Something had changed. Something fundamental. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Am I imagining this? Am I being paranoid? But every interaction, every glance, every curt email confirmed what I didn't want to admit. The dynamic had shifted. I went home that evening, sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at spreadsheets I'd stared at 1,000 times before. I tried to focus, tried to find comfort in routine, but the unease followed me, clinging to my shoulders like an invisible weight. And as I scrolled through old emails, old projects, I remembered the early days, the days when my boss had praised me openly, when meetings felt collaborative, when I felt valued. Those memories were sharp, painful even, because the contrast was so stark. Flashbacks crept in unbidden. I saw myself walking into my first big presentation, nervous and eager, my mentor's words echoing in my mind. Confidence is half of what they'll notice. Competence is the other half. Show both. I had done that. I had spent 15 years proving myself, earning trust, building relationships, navigating office politics with care and precision. And now, it felt like all of that experience, all of that loyalty, was being quietly erased. And I tried to test it, of course. I asked questions in meetings, made suggestions, shared updates. Sometimes I caught myself laughing too loudly at a joke or over-explaining a point, like overcompensation might ward off this creeping sense of exclusion. But no matter what I did, the cold undertone persisted. There were no harsh words, no confrontations, just a subtle, pervasive shift that made the office feel smaller, colder, like a space I no longer fully belonged to. Colleagues started behaving differently, too. Not outright hostility, nothing that could be called betrayal, at least not yet. Just distance. Invitations to informal lunches dwindled, casual hallway chats grew briefer, and suddenly, I noticed how often I was left out of decisions I'd once been central to. It was like watching the world I had carefully built start to retreat behind. A glass wall I couldn't break through. That evening, I sat on my couch, staring at the muted glow of my TV, and tried to reason with myself. I've been here 15 years. They can't just. But I couldn't finish the thought. There was no precedent for this. 15 years of loyalty, of late nights and early mornings, of sacrifices that no one outside the office would ever notice. And suddenly, all of it seemed fragile. That I remembered another flashback. A team celebration after a project went well, everyone laughing, my boss lifting a glass to me with genuine admiration. That memory felt like a relic from another life. A reminder that the world can shift beneath your feet faster than you realize. The unease had grown into something heavier by the end of that week. Even small interactions, the way my name was skipped over in emails, the tone of voicemails, the sideway glances from HR, felt loaded. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed in a new way, evaluated differently, and that my years of dedication didn't carry the same weight anymore. And yet, I didn't act. I told myself it was nothing. I clung to routine, Mornings with coffee, spreadsheets, reports, deadlines, the same office smells and sounds that had always comforted me. But inside, there was a tension, quiet but insistent, threading through every moment. A whisper that said, something is coming. And it's not going to be good. By the time Friday rolled around, I knew, deep down, unshakably, that the first real warning sign had arrived. I didn't know what form it would take. I didn't know when it would hit. But I felt it, unmistakable, like a storm gathering on the horizon. And for the first time in 15 years, I realized that my place in this office, my sense of stability, my sense of belonging, was no longer guaranteed. That IT didn't hit all at once. Like most things that change your life, it arrived quietly, in pieces, like the slow cracking of ice underfoot. At first, it was just a feeling, a low hum of tension that settled into the pit of my stomach. But then the signs became harder to ignore. I remember walking into the office one Monday morning, the air crisp and cold from the AC, the faint scent of burnt coffee lingering from the machine in the break room. Something felt off. Not the usual Monday sluggishness. I could tell the energy in the room had shifted. People moved differently, spoke differently. I noticed my boss's office door closed, the kind of door that had been open for 15 years. A signal of accessibility, of collaboration. Today, it was shut tight. I tried to brush it off. Busy day, new projects, nothing personal, I told myself. But then came the closed-door meetings. Invitations I once would have received automatically now arrived late, or not at all. I'd overhear snippets of conversation as I passed colleagues in the hallway. Phrases like, "We need to handle this carefully," or "make sure they know the plan." My chest would tighten, my mind spinning. Were they talking about me? Surely not. Surely, the emails grew colder. No good mornings. No casual. Hope your weekend was good. Just bullet points, action items, curt instructions. I began reading between the lines, parsing tone, searching for hidden meanings. My mind became a surveillance operation, every interaction analyzed for subtle cues. And the more I analyzed, the heavier the feeling became. Flashbacks crept in. I thought of my first project lead, years ago, staying late with my mentor who told me, "Observe the room, the people, the energy. The smallest shift can tell you everything." At the time, it was advice I nodded at politely. Now it was life. Advice. Every glance, every half smile, every avoided eye contact felt like a breadcrumb trail pointing somewhere I didn't want to go. IT wasn't just my boss. HR started acting differently too. Friendly conversations became transactional, smiles more restrained. Policies that were once loosely enforced suddenly felt like barriers, like someone was rereading the rulebook and marking me in red ink. Even casual moments, the water cooler chats, the quick jokes in the hallway, were replaced by awkward silences or brief, clipped interactions. I felt invisible, and at the same time, hypervisible, like I was under constant scrutiny. One afternoon, I was summoned to HR. Not for a formal meeting, at least, not at first, but a casual check-in. The office smelled faintly of sanitizer, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead. I walked in, my hands slightly trembling despite years of experience. The HR manager smiled, professional but strained. Small talk about my weekend, nothing unusual, yet every word carried weight. My instincts screamed at me that this wasn't just a routine conversation. "Something is coming," my mind whispered, but I clung to hope, stubborn as ever. Later, I walked back to my desk, each step echoing in the quiet corridor. I couldn't shake the feeling that the office had changed overnight, though logically I knew it hadn't. The patterns had shifted. The rhythm of recognition and trust I'd relied on for 15 years now felt fragile, like walking on thin ice. I stared at my screen, at the familiar spreadsheets, the neatly organized folders, the tiny sticky notes decorating the edge of my monitor. Even these objects, my anchors in normalcy, seemed suddenly foreign, as if the office itself were turning against me. That I thought of my early days at the company, that first year filled with excitement and naive optimism. I remembered late nights in the office, learning the ropes, the camaraderie of a team that felt like family. I thought of mentorship moments, the laughter over shared victories, the quiet encouragement that had carried me through mistakes. It felt like a lifetime ago, and the contrast cut deep. How could something I'd built so carefully, nurtured with dedication and loyalty, be slipping through my fingers without warning? That week, the tension became a constant companion. I noticed small things: a pause before emails were answered, subtle shifts in tone during meetings, colleagues' eyes flicking toward doors as if waiting for a signal. Every interaction became a test I wasn't prepared for, a puzzle I couldn't solve. And with each passing day, the little voice in my head grew louder. You're next. They're planning something. You're being replaced, and I tried to distract myself. I focused on tasks, on routine, on the comforting hum of printers and the clatter of keyboards. I sipped my coffee, stared at personal mementos on my desk, photos of family, a small plant that had survived against all odds, a post-it from a colleague praising my work. These things grounded me, but only barely. Even the familiar smells and sounds, once comforting, now carried an undercurrent of dread. One evening, I stayed late to finish a project. The office was quiet, empty except for the soft hum of computers and the occasional clatter of a cleaning cart in the distance. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes, and realized I had spent the day walking on a tightrope, trying to anticipate every interaction, every glance. My mind raced with scenarios, each one more unsettling than the last. And in that moment, I understood the full weight of what was happening. The first red flags weren't isolated incidents. They were a warning, a map leading toward a conclusion I wasn't ready to face. For the first time in 15 years, I felt the sense of certainty I had clung to vanish. My world, once predictable and secure, now felt unstable, like the ground beneath me had shifted without warning. And deep down, beneath the hope and denial, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was coming. Something inevitable. I remember the morning like it was a scene someone else had directed, and I was just a helpless actor caught in the wrong frame. The office felt different the moment I walked in. The usual hum of computers and chatter was subdued, almost anticipatory, like the air itself was holding its breath. I didn't know it yet, but I was walking into the eye of the storm. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Meeting with HR and your manager, 10 a.m. Normally, these were routine check-ins, nothing more than a casual conversation about projects or deadlines. But something in my gut told me this was different. I felt it in the hollow weight in my stomach, the way my hands felt clammy despite the warmth of the coffee I'd been holding like a lifeline. I sat at my desk, pretending to focus on emails while rehearsing in my head every possible scenario. Maybe it's just a restructuring, I told myself. Maybe they want to discuss a new role, a promotion even. But deep down, I knew better. The red flags, the subtle shifts in behavior, the distance from colleagues, they all pointed to something I didn't want to admit. The knock on my office door was soft but firm. My manager appeared, face carefully neutral, but eyes betraying a glimmer of the tension I'd been feeling for weeks. "Can we talk in my office?" he asked. I nodded, following him down the hall, each step echoing ominously. The closer we got, the more I felt my heartbeat accelerate. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to run, but I knew I couldn't. 15 years of loyalty, of hard work, of navigating this world with care had led to this exact moment. We sat across from each other, a polished wooden desk between us. The office was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the distant tapping of keyboards from colleagues who pretended not to notice. I took a deep breath, hoping for a lifeline, a word of reassurance. My manager cleared his throat. "We need to let you go," he said. Those words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, I couldn't process it. My mind scrambled for comprehension, searching for a mistake, a misunderstanding. "Let me explain. I can fix this. You can't do this after everything." But the words caught in my throat. My body felt frozen, even as a cold sweat crept down my spine. Flashbacks hit me in a sudden, painful wave. I saw my first day, nervous and eager, shaking hands with the mentor who promised guidance and stability. I remembered late nights helping, colleagues stepping in for projects no one else wanted, taking on responsibilities I didn't need to because I believed in the work in this company. All of it felt like it had been erased in a single breath. My manager continued, explaining the decision in measured tones. "It's part of restructuring," he said. "It's nothing personal." But it was personal. It had to be. 15 years of dedication, 15 years of sacrifices, birthdays missed, vacations delayed, personal life pushed aside, all dismissed with the phrase, "It's nothing personal." I wanted to laugh bitterly, to scream, to demand a reason that made sense. Instead, I nodded numbly, trying to keep control of the shaking in my hands. The HR representative handed me a folder, documents outlining severance, benefits, the formalities of leaving. I felt my chest tighten as I flipped through the papers, each one a reminder that this was real, that my routine, my stability, my identity within these walls was gone. The smell of paper and ink, once comforting, now carried a bitter undertone. I wanted to throw the folder, tear it apart, do something, anything, but I sat frozen, absorbing it all. That I remembered our last real conversation, just a week ago. My manager had laughed at a joke I made, clapped me on the shoulder, said, "Keep up the great work." I had smiled, not knowing it would be our final genuine interaction. That memory stung worse than the firing itself, a cruel reminder of how quickly things could change. As I gathered my belongings, photos, a small plant, a few personal mementos, I felt a strange mixture of anger, disbelief, and numbness. I walked past my colleagues, some staring, some avoiding eye contact. I caught whispers, fleeting glances, and for the first time, I realized how invisible you can become when the world you relied on decides you no longer belong. The door clicked behind me, echoing down the hallway like the closing of a tomb. Outside, the city continued as if nothing had happened, unaware that my life inside this office had just ended. I felt hollow, yet a small spark flickered in the pit of my stomach, a stubborn defiance I didn't understand yet. I didn't know what came next, but I knew this wasn't the end of my story. That I walked to my car in a daze, the cold metal of the door handle grounding me to the moment. Rain had started falling lightly, the drops pattering on the windshield like a muted drumbeat to my thoughts. I sat for a moment, staring at the dashboard, replaying every moment, every subtle warning sign I had ignored, every interaction that now seemed like part of a carefully laid pattern. For the first time in years, I realized how fragile stability truly is. I had spent 15 years building trust, loyalty, and routine, and in a matter of minutes, it had all evaporated. And yet, beneath the shock and betrayal, beneath the anger and disbelief, there was that tiny, stubborn ember of something else, a realization that this was not the end. Not yet. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but I knew I had to keep moving, even if the ground beneath me felt like it had been ripped away. Walking out of that office for the last time, I felt the air hit me differently. The familiar smells of printers, coffee, and recycled carpet were gone, replaced by the crisp bite of the city. It was quiet, too quiet, like the world had been holding its breath, waiting for me to crumble. My hands gripped the steering wheel, so tightly my knuckles ached, the metal cool against my palms, and for a moment, I just sat there, letting the reality sink in. I replayed the conversation in my head over and over. My manager's carefully neutral tone, HR's rehearsed professionalism, the folder in my hand that outlined everything I needed to know about severance and benefits. Each page a small dagger reminding me that my years of loyalty didn't matter. "It's nothing personal," they said. Funny how words meant to soften a blow can land heavier than anything else. Of course it was personal. It was my life, my routine, my identity being ripped apart. Flashbacks flooded me. I saw my first promotion, the pride swelling as my boss shook my hand. I remembered late nights working to meet impossible deadlines, skipping family dinners, missing birthdays and anniversaries. I thought of the sacrifices I had made, the loyalty I had shown, the blood, sweat, and small victories I had poured into this company. And now, it all felt meaningless, like a book whose pages had been shredded before anyone could read them. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the stoplights, the cars around me, or even if I followed the correct route. All I could feel was a whirlwind inside my chest. Numbness mingled with a slow, simmering anger. How could 15 years of dedication be dismissed in a single meeting? How could people I trusted look me in the eye and act as though this was routine, as though this was normal? I got home, sat on the couch, and just stared. My apartment smelled faintly of the incense I burned sometimes, the kettle I'd used that morning, a lingering hint of coffee. Everything was normal, but I wasn't. I felt untethered, like a leaf blown from a tree, spinning, unable to catch. hold of anything solid. My mind replayed the hallway, the office door clicking shut behind me, the faces of colleagues, some sympathetic, most avoiding eye contact. Every detail etched itself into my memory, like evidence I wasn't ready to confront. I tried to reach out to friends, but the words caught in my throat. How do you explain being fired after 15 years? How do you condense betrayal, disbelief, and grief into a casual conversation over the phone? So I stayed silent. I wandered through my apartment, touching objects absent-mindedly, family photos, books, a small plant on the windowsill. Each item anchored me briefly, grounding me in a reality I could control, if only for a few moments. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed, the ceiling fan whirring softly above, staring at the dark shapes of shadows cast by the moonlight. My mind refused to rest. Thoughts looped endlessly. Was there something I could have done? Did I miss the signs? Could I have prevented this? I hated myself for questioning my worth, for doubting my skills, for imagining that maybe I deserved it somehow. 15 years of effort, dedication, and loyalty, reduced to a sense of fragility I couldn't shake. The next day was worse. The emptiness at home mirrored the emptiness I felt inside. I went for a walk, hoping the cold air would clear my mind, but it didn't. The city was alive, people hustling, car horns blaring, the faint scent of street food and exhaust, but I felt isolated, as if I were moving through a world that no longer had a place for me. I passed offices, watched workers streaming in with backpacks and coffee cups, and I felt a pang of jealousy mixed with disbelief. That used to be me. That could have been me. I tried to distract myself with routine, checking emails, tidying up the apartment, even cooking, but every action was tinged with a strange dissonance. My body moved automatically, but my mind wandered. I thought of my colleagues, wondering how quickly they'd forget me, how easily the company would move on. It was humiliating, in a quiet, internal way. Not the dramatic anger you see in movies, just a slow, gnawing frustration that made every mundane task feel heavier. Flashbacks continued, unbidden. A successful presentation, laughter in the break room, mentorship moments, birthday celebrations. Each memory carried a sting, a bittersweet reminder that the office had once been a place of belonging, of growth, of pride. And now it was gone. I had been erased quietly, efficiently, like a line of code deleted from a program, leaving only emptiness in its place. Anger began to creep in, simmering beneath the surface. Not the explosive kind that shatters things, but a quiet, persistent anger that demanded acknowledgement. Anger at the betrayal, at the dismissal, at the cruel irony of being told it was nothing personal. I wanted to scream into the void, to demand justice, but I was alone with my thoughts, alone with the unfairness of it all. Yet, amid the numbness and anger, a tiny flicker remained, a stubborn ember that refused to be extinguished. Somewhere, deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. I didn't know what came next, but I understood that the world hadn't broken me yet. It was a beginning I wasn't ready for, but a beginning nonetheless. That I sat in silence, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, feeling both lost and acutely aware. This was the immediate aftermath, the moment when reality strikes hardest, when the ground beneath you has shifted and you are forced to confront the void. I felt fragile, yes, but also alive in a strange, painful way. And for the first time since the firing, I let myself think one thought: I will find a way through this. Somehow, the days after being fired bled together. Time felt distorted, like I was moving through water, each moment slow and heavy. Nights were worse than days. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of the city seeping through the walls, and my mind would spiral. Questions I didn't want to ask kept coming back. Did I miss the signs? Was it something I did? Something I didn't do? I replayed every interaction from the past few months. That curt email from my boss that I'd shrugged off. The brief pauses before colleagues responded in meetings. The subtle changes in HR's demeanor. Every detail I had once ignored now felt like evidence, like clues in a puzzle I was desperate to solve. I questioned myself endlessly, turning over every word, every action, looking for a fault I could blame, a mistake I could have avoided. Flashbacks became a constant companion. I remembered the late nights, the extra projects I took on, the presentations where I had gone above and beyond, and the small victories that had once felt monumental. I thought of the time I stayed late to help a colleague meet a deadline, sacrificing my own evening, or the countless times I rearranged my schedule to accommodate someone else's priorities. At the time, it felt like commitment, loyalty, and pride. Now, those sacrifices stung like salt on an open wound that I started to see patterns I hadn't noticed before. Moments that had seemed inconsequential, an offhand remark, a skipped acknowledgement, a fleeting look of impatience, now felt like early warnings I had ignored. It was humbling and painfully isolating. I questioned my judgment, my instincts, even my worth. 15 years of experience, and yet here I was, feeling like I had failed at the one thing I thought I could never fail. Holding on to the stability of my career that I walked through my apartment in circles, hands gripping the edges of tables, countertops, anything solid, trying to ground myself. The familiar smells, the faint scent of laundry, the lingering aroma of morning coffee, offered some comfort, but it was fragile. My mind wouldn't let me rest. I kept thinking about my colleagues, my boss, the office itself, and how quickly it had all moved on without me. Sometimes, I would catch myself staring at my reflection in the mirror for long stretches. My eyes looked back tired, a little hollow, searching for a version of myself I didn't recognize. I felt fragile, vulnerable, and strangely exposed, like being stripped of the familiar rhythms of daily life had laid me bare. I wondered if this was what it felt like to truly confront your own impermanence, your own fragility, and the fact that loyalty doesn't always guarantee security. That I reached for my laptop one evening, scrolling through old emails and documents, not to check work, but to remind myself of who I had been. Achievements, approvals, emails of appreciation, they were all there. But instead of comfort, I felt a bittersweet ache. I did my best, I whispered to myself. I gave everything, and it wasn't enough. The words tasted hollow in my mouth, but I repeated them anyway, as if speaking them aloud could make them true. I remembered conversations with mentors years ago when I was still bright-eyed and hungry for growth. Observe, learn, adapt. At the time, I had followed the advice carefully, believing that hard work and loyalty would shield me from misfortune. But now, I realized that life doesn't follow a predictable equation. Loyalty doesn't always protect you. Hard work doesn't always guarantee reward. And sometimes, the world moves in ways you can't anticipate, leaving you scrambling to make sense of it. That I questioned everything about my own choices, the decisions I had made, the opportunities one had taken or passed up, the moments when I thought I was being strategic and realized I had only been reacting. It was a painful process, this self-reflection, because it forced me to confront not only the actions of others, but also my own vulnerabilities. I had trusted too easily, assumed stability, and ignored the subtle warnings until they became unavoidable. And yet, in the midst of all this doubt, a small clarity began to emerge. I realized that while I couldn't control the actions of others, I could control how I responded. I could let this break me, or I could let it teach me. It was a humbling revelation, like stepping out of a fog and finally seeing the terrain clearly, even if the path ahead was uncertain. I spent hours just thinking, walking, staring out the window at the city lights, the traffic, the distant hum of life that didn't pause for anyone's grief. And in those hours, I began to piece together something essential. I was not defined by this job, by the firing, or by the betrayal. I was defined by how I chose to move forward. And though the doubts and the hurt were still there, simmering beneath the surface, I started to understand that they were part of the process, necessary, even, to rebuild a sense of self and a life that wasn't tied to a single company or a single identity. By the end of that week, I began journaling, trying to externalize the thoughts that swirled endlessly in my head. Writing them down felt like lifting weight off my shoulders, acknowledging the pain without letting it consume me entirely. I wrote about the betrayal, the anger, the helplessness, but also about the flickers of resilience, the moments when I felt a spark of clarity. Slowly, a map of sorts began to emerge, a path from despair to recovery, from self-doubt to self-awareness. It was the first time in days that I felt a sense of control return, fragile as it was. The doubts hadn't vanished. They probably never would. but I was beginning to see them not as a trap, but as a guide. They forced me to reflect, to confront myself, and to acknowledge that while I had been blindsided by others, I still had the power to shape what came next. After days of confusion, doubt, and endless self-questioning, I realized that sitting in my apartment, replaying the firing on loop, wasn't helping me. It was time to seek answers, some sense, some clarity, some small foothold in the chaos that had become my life. I needed to understand why this happened, not just for closure, but to reclaim a sense of agency I hadn't felt since walking out of that office. The first step was talking to colleagues. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the phone, heart pounding. Reaching out felt like opening a wound, yet I couldn't stay trapped in silence. One by one, I called former teammates, people I had trusted, mentors who had guided me. The conversations were a mixture of sympathy, awkward pauses, and careful truths. Some answers were practical. Restructuring, budget cuts, strategic changes. I heard the same corporate jargon I had memorized over 15 years. But underneath the polite phrasing, I caught glimpses of something else. Uncertainty, fear, even regret. People admitted, quietly, that they hadn't known what was coming either, or that decisions had been made at a higher level with little concern for the human cost. It was frustrating, painful, and yet strangely illuminating. I realized that much of the why lay outside of me, outside of my control, and that sometimes people's actions are guided by forces you can't influence, no matter how loyal or competent you are. I also spent hours reviewing my own history at the company. Emails, project reports, performance reviews. All of it became a source of insight. I wanted to find a pattern, some evidence that might explain the firing beyond the corporate speak. And as I read, I realized something crucial. I had done my job well, better than well in many cases. There were no glaring failures, no repeated mistakes, no sign that my work had ever been lacking. What I discovered instead was a reminder that sometimes success and dedication do not inoculate you from the whims of organizational change. Flashbacks accompanied every insight. I saw my younger self, eager and full of ambition, staying late to guide a junior colleague through a complex report. I remembered presentations where I had led initiatives, the small victories celebrated in hushed office corners. Those moments were proof that I had contributed, that I had mattered, even if the company no longer recognized it. It was comforting and bittersweet, proof of value, yet proof of what had been lost. That I reached out to mentors outside the company, people who had guided me in my career and understood the industry. Their advice was practical, yes, but also grounding. Focus on what you can control, one said. Don't let this define your worth. Another reminded me that careers are rarely linear and that moments of crisis often precede reinvention. I scribbled notes, highlighted passages, and began to see the outlines of a plan, small steps to reclaim stability, rebuild confidence, and redefine my professional identity. In the evenings, I pored over job boards, LinkedIn connections, and professional networks. At first, it was intimidating. The flood of opportunities, the competitive marketplace, the realization that I was no longer part of the company I had given 15 years to. It was overwhelming. But gradually, a sense of determination began to take hold. This wasn't just about finding another job. It was about proving to myself that I still had value, that my experience and skills weren't erased by a single corporate decision. I also turned inward, trying to reconcile my emotional state with my practical actions. I journaled late at night, scribbling raw thoughts, the anger, the grief, the fear, but also the flickers of hope and resilience. I let myself feel everything without judgment. I allowed tears to flow, let frustration be voiced, and slowly, a sense of clarity emerged. I wasn't powerless. I might have been blindsided, but I could respond. I could act. I could find a path forward. Flashbacks mingled with the present, offering both lessons and motivation. I remembered the first day at the company, the advice of my mentor: observe, learn, adapt. Now, years later, I understood the full meaning. I had observed the subtle shifts, learned their significance, and adapted too late. But the same principles could guide me now: notice, understand, act. It was time to pivot, to take control, to find my own way out of the storm. Some days were harder than others. I sat for hours staring at applications, drafting resumes, rewriting cover letters, feeling the weight of rejection and uncertainty before I even began. Other days, I felt sparks of hope, small victories when a contact responded positively, or when I realized that my experience still held weight and relevance. Each small step became a lifeline, a reminder that action, however slow, was better than paralysis, and slowly, the emotional fog began to lift. The anger remained, yes, simmering beneath the surface, but it was no longer immobilizing. The sadness lingered, but it had a purpose now. It reminded me of what I had lost, and that loss gave meaning to the fight ahead. I was learning to navigate the aftermath not just by surviving, but by actively seeking understanding, clarity, and opportunity. By the end of this period, I felt a fragile but undeniable sense of agency returning. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't control the decisions of those who fired me, but I could control the next steps, the choices I made, the way I responded to this upheaval. I had begun to reclaim my life, piece by piece, guided by reflection, insight, and a slowly growing confidence that I could rebuild. That I realized then that searching for answers wasn't just about understanding the firing. It was about understanding myself, about separating my worth from the decisions of others, about recognizing that the storm had exposed vulnerabilities, yes, but also resilience. And that realization, small as it was, marked the first step toward moving forward. The first morning I woke up after deciding to take control felt strange. The weight of shock and disbelief had lifted slightly, replaced by a quiet determination that pulsed through my chest. I made coffee, black, strong, the aroma filling my small kitchen and grounding me in the moment. The city outside buzzed with life, indifferent, yet strangely comforting in its constancy. Today, I told myself, I would stop replaying the past and start shaping the future. I started small. Emails to contacts I had lost touch with, catching up with former colleagues not out of desperation, but to reestablish connections, to remind myself, in them, that I was still here, still relevant. I drafted a schedule for the week, listing practical steps, update my resume, apply to positions that matched my skills, research companies I admired, and reach out to mentors for guidance. Every item checked off felt like a tiny victory, a small handhold in a world that had seemed unsteady for too long. Flashbacks haunted me less during this process, replaced by proactive thoughts. I remembered projects where I had led teams to success, the times I had been praised for my insights, and even the small, everyday victories that no one else noticed. These memories weren't just nostalgia. They were evidence, proof that my skills, my experience, my dedication, all of it still mattered. I began writing these achievements down, creating a narrative of capability and resilience that I could carry into interviews, networking conversations, and applications. That I dedicated entire afternoons to learning, brushing up on skills that had become rusty, taking online courses, reading industry updates. At first, it felt awkward, like I was a student again, fumbling through concepts I had mastered years ago. But with each completed module, each new insight, my confidence returned. I realized that while I had been blindsided by the firing, I hadn't lost my ability to grow, to adapt, to compete. Applying for jobs became a ritual. I woke each morning with a sense of purpose, coffee in hand, the screen lighting up my face as I drafted cover letters, tailored resumes, and researched potential employers. Rejections came, of course, some polite, some curt. Each one stung. But I framed them differently now, not as evidence of my inadequacy, but as part of a process, steps on a ladder I was climbing slowly but deliberately. I also began networking intentionally. I attended virtual meetups, joined professional groups, even reached out to former mentors and colleagues for informational interviews. These conversations were both humbling and empowering. I realized that my network was still valuable, that people remembered me for the contributions I had made, and that my experience still held weight in a larger professional landscape. Every positive response, every encouraging word, became fuel for the fire I had rekindled within myself. Even my emotional state shifted as I took action. The numbness and grief, while not gone, had a framework now. I allowed myself moments of reflection, yes, but I didn't let them immobilize me. I created rituals for balance, morning walks, journaling, meditation, Even small indulgences like cooking a meal I enjoyed or playing music that stirred me. These acts, seemingly insignificant, became lifelines, reminders that life could still be pleasurable. Even amid upheaval that I started thinking about opportunities differently. I realized I wasn't just looking for a job. I was looking for a space where I could be valued, where my expertise and loyalty would be recognized, and where my career could grow in new directions. This perspective shift changed how I approached interviews and applications. I stopped trying to fit into pre-existing molds and instead highlighted what made me unique. My experience, my perspective, my resilience in the face of real adversity. Flashbacks continued, but now they served as guides, rather than anchors of pain. I remembered moments when I had succeeded despite obstacles, when I had solved problems others couldn't, when my insight had made a tangible difference. Those memories became a map of my strengths, a reminder that the years I had invested were not wasted. They were the foundation I could now build upon. Point one evening, I received an email from a former colleague, someone I had reached out to days earlier. They had recommended me for a position at another company. My heart leapt, a rush of adrenaline mixed with disbelief. I stared at the message, rereading it multiple times, allowing myself a small, private smile. It was a reminder that the world hadn't stopped noticing me, that even in this upheaval, opportunities existed. And it was my job to grab them. By the end of the first month of this rebuilding phase, I could feel subtle changes in myself. I was moving with purpose again, rather than drifting. My thoughts were more strategic, less reactive. The anger that had once consumed me now had direction. It fueled action, not despair. I had taken the first steps to reclaim my professional identity, and with each step, the heavy fog of betrayal lifted slightly, replaced by clarity and resolve. And yet, I knew the journey wasn't over. Rebuilding wasn't a single act, a one-time triumph. It was ongoing, a series of conscious choices, small victories, and constant reaffirmation of my own worth. But for the first time since the firing, I felt in control again. The world hadn't broken me. It had forced me to confront loss, doubt, and vulnerability, but it had also reminded me of my resilience, my resourcefulness, and my capacity to adapt. As I closed my laptop that night, the city lights reflected softly in the window. I felt a quiet pride. Not for the job I had lost, but for the steps I was taking to reclaim myself. The road ahead was uncertain, yes, but I had begun walking it intentionally, with eyes open and heart engaged. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a calm certainty. I was no longer defined by what had happened to me. I was defined by what I chose to do next. Weeks of searching, networking, and self-reflection had finally begun to bear fruit. It started as a glimmer, a small possibility that seemed almost too good to be true. An email notification appeared in my inbox late one evening, soft and unassuming, yet it carried the potential to change everything. A company I admired, a place aligned with my skills, values, and vision, had invited me for an interview. I stared at the screen for several minutes, my coffee cooling beside me, heart pounding in a mix of excitement and disbelief. This is real. This is happening. The days leading up to the interview were a blend of meticulous preparation and anxious anticipation. I rehearsed answers, reviewed the company's history, and imagined scenarios in which I could demonstrate not just my experience, but my resilience, my adaptability, my ability to thrive even after being blindsided. Each time I practiced, I felt a little more confidence returning, a reminder that the storm I had endured had not eroded my capability. Flashbacks surfaced, as they always did, but differently this time. I thought of the humiliation and helplessness, of the firing, the long nights of self-doubt, and the early mornings of determination to rebuild. These memories no longer paralyzed me. Instead, they fueled me. I realized that each setback, each moment of despair, had sharpened me, prepared me for challenges ahead. The experiences that once felt like scars had become markers of endurance and growth. The interview day arrived. I walked into the building, the lobby buzzing with energy and purpose. The scent of polished floors and brewed coffee filled the air, familiar yet new. I shook hands with the hiring manager, looked them in the eye, and for the first time in months, I felt grounded. I spoke confidently about my past roles, my accomplishments, and even the period of upheaval that had followed. My firing. I framed it not as a weakness, but as a demonstration of resilience and adaptability. Proof that I could thrive under pressure. As the conversation unfolded, I realized that this wasn't just an opportunity for employment, it was validation. A reminder that my years of dedication, expertise, and effort mattered, that I had value outside the walls of the company that had let me go. It was the kind of acknowledgement that no severance package or HR explanation could provide. It was tangible, real, and deeply satisfying. After the interview, I walked through the nearby park, letting the crisp air fill my lungs. I reflected on the journey, the firing, the aftermath, the doubts, the nights of restless pacing and journaled thoughts. And I realized that each step, however painful, had led me here. I felt a sense of clarity that had eluded me for weeks. Setbacks are not the end. They are detours, lessons, sometimes necessary for finding the path you were meant to walk. A few days later, I received the call, the offer. The voice on the other end sounded warm and enthusiastic, confirming what I had hoped for but dared not expect. I accepted, heart swelling with a mixture of relief, pride, and a quiet, persistent joy. I remembered the first time I had felt pride at the company I had been fired from, and I compared it to this moment. The difference was profound. This pride was earned, reclaimed, and carried with the awareness that it could not be taken lightly or dismissed. As I prepared for the transition into this new role, I allowed myself small celebrations. A dinner with close friends who had supported me, a quiet evening alone reflecting on the journey, a walk in the rain that now felt cleansing, rather than ominous. I felt gratitude, not just for the opportunity, but for the lessons, for the resilience I had uncovered, for the strength I didn't realize I possessed until it had been tested. Flashbacks continued to intertwine with the present, but now they carried lessons rather than pain. I remembered the meetings where I had felt invisible, the emails that went unanswered, the cold professionalism of HR. And I saw them for what they were: experiences that had forced me to confront my vulnerability, to question my worth, and ultimately, to grow. Without those moments, I might not have recognized this new opportunity or valued it as deeply as I did. I also noticed a subtle shift in my own perception. Where once I had sought security, I now sought purpose. Where I had once craved stability, I now craved growth and challenge. And this opportunity, more than just a job, represented a chance to redefine my career on my terms, to reclaim agency over my life and choices. The day I signed the offer letter, I felt a mix of excitement and serenity. The paper was crisp under my fingers, the pen cool and steady as I wrote my name. It wasn't just a signature, it was a declaration, a promise to myself that I would not be defined by betrayal or fear, but by action, resilience, and determination. I thought of the 15 years I had lost, not with bitterness, but with respect for the lessons they had taught me, and I stepped forward into a new chapter. That evening, I sat by the window, the city lights shimmering against the dark sky, and let myself breathe. The journey had been painful, humbling, and at times terrifying, but the new opportunity had transformed it from a story of loss into a story of growth. I felt whole again, not because the past was erased, but because I had reclaimed my narrative, learned to trust myself, and discovered that even after being blindsided, life could surprise you with doors opening where walls once stood. Sitting in my new office, looking out over the city skyline, I sometimes pause and allow myself to take it all in. The hum of computers, the quiet conversations, the aroma of fresh coffee. It all feels familiar, yet different. I've returned to a world of work, but not the same one I left behind. This place, this role, represents not only opportunity, but also perspective, a chance to rebuild not just a career, but a sense of self that had been shaken to its core. That I reflect on the journey, the firing, the shock, the heartbreak, and the uncertainty that followed. It feels surreal to think that I once sat in my apartment, numb and consumed by doubt, replaying the last 15 years as though they could be unwritten. I remember the cold hallway, the HR folder, the polite but devastating words. "It's nothing personal." At the time, those words had cut deeper than I could express, but now I understand them differently. They were not a judgment of my worth. They were a turning point, an abrupt punctuation mark that forced me to reconsider everything I had taken for granted. Flashbacks come unbidden, yet they no longer sting. I recall moments of pride at my previous job, leading projects, mentoring colleagues, contributing to something larger than myself. I remember the late nights and missed celebrations, the laughter and camaraderie that had made the office feel like a second home. And I remember the betrayal, the sudden dismissal, the sense of invisibility. Each memory carries weight, yes, but also meaning. They are the pieces of a story I lived fully, and now, with hindsight, I see how each piece shaped the person I've become. That I realize that closure isn't about forgetting or excusing what happened. It isn't about pretending the firing didn't hurt. Closure is about understanding, about framing the experience in a way that empowers rather than diminishes. It's about recognizing that the people and circumstances that hurt you are part of your story, but they do not define it. What defines it is how you respond, how you rise after the fall, how you allow adversity to teach resilience instead of breeding resentment. That I reflect on the doubts that plagued me for weeks, the relentless self-questioning, the moments when I wondered if I had failed somehow. Those doubts were necessary. They forced me to confront myself honestly, to acknowledge vulnerabilities, and to recognize areas where growth was possible. They became catalysts, not prisons. And through them, I discovered that strength doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it is quiet, persistent, forged in the small decisions to keep moving, even when hope feels distant. Looking at my reflection in the office window, I see someone tempered by experience. There is a calmness in my gaze that wasn't there before, a recognition that life is unpredictable, that stability can vanish in an instant, but that resilience is something internal, something unshakable. I see scars, yes, but not weaknesses. I see proof of survival, of adaptation, of learning. And with that realization comes a strange sense of peace. That I think about the people who let me down, the corporate machinery that pushed me out, and the colleagues who looked away. And I forgive, not for their sake, but for mine. Forgiveness here is liberation. It doesn't erase the past, but it frees me from carrying bitterness, from letting anger and betrayal dictate my emotional state. It allows me to carry forward the lessons, the awareness, and the resilience without the weight of resentment. Flashbacks now feel like chapters rather than chains. The firing, the aftermath, the self-reflection, and the search for opportunity, they are threads woven into a tapestry that tells a story of endurance and growth. I see how each moment, however painful, was essential. Without the shock, I might not have taken the steps to rebuild so intentionally. Without the doubts, I might not have reflected so deeply. Without the struggle, the triumphs that followed would have lacked the depth and meaning they now carry. As I settle into my new routine, I carry with me a sense of gratitude that surprises me. Gratitude for lessons learned, for resilience discovered, for opportunities that emerged from adversity. I am grateful for the moments of fear and vulnerability because they revealed the strength I didn't know I had. I am grateful for this chance to redefine my path, to choose work that aligns with my values, and to approach life with a clearer sense of purpose. That I also understand now that stability is not a guarantee. It is an effort, a practice, a mindful presence in life. It is not found in a title, a paycheck, or an office, but in the ability to adapt, to learn, and to keep moving forward when certainty disappears. That insight, gained through pain and perseverance, is worth more than any job, any promotion, or any validation from others. Sometimes, I still think about the day I was fired, the abruptness, the shock. I allow myself a quiet moment of acknowledgement, a nod to the past without letting it linger. I remember the numbness, the anger, the heartbreak, but now I see it as a necessary crucible that refined me. I am not the same person who walked out of that office, stunned and uncertain. I am stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. As I close my laptop at the end of the day, the office quiets down, and the lights dim, I feel a profound sense of completion. Not the completion of a story without hardship, but the completion of a chapter in which I have reclaimed agency, rediscovered confidence, and embraced growth. I look forward to what comes next, not with naive optimism, but with informed courage and a grounded understanding that life's unpredictability can also be its greatest teacher. And in that moment, I finally feel it, closure. Not the kind that erases pain, but the kind that transforms it. the kind that allows me to walk forward, carrying the lessons of the past with dignity, resilience, and a renewed sense of self. I have survived betrayal. I have faced doubt. I have risen from the ashes of uncertainty. And now I move forward, not just surviving, but living fully, consciously, and deliberately.